Hey there, friend. It's only about 4:45, about 15 minutes later than I'd originally planned. That's pretty good. Uh, Welcome to what is essentially part three of a live masterclass on drum mixing. And you'll notice a few things. Let's see. I got a haircut. I don't know if you can tell. I got some new lights. Now you can tell how badly I need to get out and get some sun. And a few little other things that we'll get to as we go along the way. I hope you're doing well. I'm kind of just spinning my wheels a little bit just so I can make sure that we get everybody that's going to be on the stream today. And I'm also kind of getting myself settled in and around here because there's a lot of bells and whistles in front of me. But yeah, so the idea here is that, well, right now I can only see your comments. I can't see who jumps in on any of the live stream stuff. I'm only looking at comments. So as we go today, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to type them in the comment section below, or if you're on YouTube, I think it's to the, I have to look over there, see, to the side. Yeah, that's the left side. Anyway, I'm still getting the handle on this live streaming business. But yeah, so today, if you don't already know, we are, let me find my other, find my picture I really do like a lot here. Today, we've got a very intellectual discussion that we're going to have specifically about mixing drums and drum overheads, really. Those are the things that I'm really looking at, is the drum overheads. Oh, I like that one. That's a vinyl record. Except I should have worn a more colorful shirt for you today. None more black, I think, is how it goes. Anyway, neither here nor there. We're going to be talking about the waves created, Andrew Scheps created, Scheps Omni Channel plugin. I use it on every single mix I ever do. If you've watched the previous two videos, you already know from watching the bass drum video and the snare drum video that this plugin replaces anywhere from 4 to 6 or 7 different plugins that I used to have to strap together in series to work on drum sounds in my mixes. This one plugin really does a little bit of everything. And even though it's not set up to have my voice, I'll flip back over for just a second and show that to you. That's the Omni Channel. That's the plugin we'll be talking about today. Oh, hey, John, good to see you, man. The Omni Channel is fabulous. It does so much. And hopefully you don't hear my dogs going crazy upstairs. We're talking about drums. Eventually, I'm hoping to really do a whole series of these where I get all the way through all kinds of instruments and vocals and all the different ways that I use this plugin. It's incredibly flexible, and it just does a lot. There's a lot under the hood. And you'll see today as we're working with the overhead mics, how I like to use it, and how I utilize different stages of the plugin, because it actually has different pieces. Presets are great start. They really are. With the thing that I tell most people is, if you're confused about that interface when you first open it up, is go into some of the presets, into the preset folder, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. And start with Andrew's presets. His are probably the most universal of all the things that I've found in there. But you'll find plugins for stuff that's more sort of indie rock sounding. You'll find things that are definitely more metal sounding, hard rock sounding. Some things that are a little more hi-fi, an audiophile. So yeah, John, it's a great plugin. And as we go along, if anybody has any questions specifically about this, or if you've watched the other two videos and you've got questions, I'll try and field those today as we're talking. And if you wait till the end of the video, I'll tell you exactly how you can win your own copy of this plugin if you don't already own it. And let's see, if you want to try and win, if you're in that situation where spending 40 or 50 bucks on a plugin is not in your current budget, we are giving away a few copies of the Waves Scheps Omni Channel plugin. All you have to do is go over to faderjocks.com and sign up for the email list. And each week we're giving away a copy of that, and you get notified by email. So if you're already on the email list, you're qualified. If you sign up during this period of time while I'm doing these master classes about the plugin, then you're eligible to win, and you get notified by email when we do that. So I love this thing so much. Waves isn't paying me to be here. I just decided I wanted to share how I use this plugin with you because it's so valuable to me. It has really sped up my workflow a lot and has allowed me to be able to really, in some ways, cut down on my CPU usage, because the one plugin with all of its integrated modules take up a lot less CPU cycles than if I'd strung a bunch of things together. And so that's it. What we're going to do is let me flip over to, well, I had my thing here. Let me flip over using, I've got a couple of ways to get to where I need to get to. There we go. To my computer screen. And so we've been talking about this particular drum mix that I did. If this is your first time to join us on the stream, I'll play a little bit of this drum track for you so you can hear what the drums sound like before they were processed. And in this case, this is completely dry. I've got a whole folder full of the exact same tracks with nothing on them. So there we're looking at that folder with nothing on those tracks. Real woody, earthy kind of tones. So that's that sound. Now, here's the sound of everything after these drums were mixed. There's a little added hi-hat part that I'll take out of there. And if I flip over real quick, you'll see up here pretty much every channel, all of these channels, is the Waves Scheps Omni Channel. The only place I didn't use it, I used it I made a stereo aux for my left and right overheads. We'll talk about that in a second. The only place I didn't use it on the drums really for the actual microphone channels is I used the SSL-E channel for the hi-hat and this added hi-hat overdub that we did. And that's because all I really needed was to have a little bit of a high-pass filter around 80 hertz, I guess. Big difference. You know, if I'll very quickly. Now, lest you think that the reverb in this case is really tricking you, when it loops back around, we'll hear it without the reverb. You can hear. Reverb helps in terms of giving it space and depth, but the reverb doesn't do anything in terms of. I could put this in loop, couldn't I? The reverb doesn't do anything in terms of the actual sound of the drums, I mean, other than the space and the bigness of it. So here's the nothing on it. If you can hear, if you're listening on a system where you can really hear the sub lows, you hear how there's kind of a flutter in that low end. I mean, it's a good sounding kit. Using the EQ in the Omni Channel. Oh yeah, definitely using the EQ in the Omni Channel. I'll show you what I'm doing in the overheads in just a second. Let it loop around. and I'll put back in the reverb. Like I say, the reverb just gives it a little more space. It's not really doing anything to affect the sound of the drums. And then I've got a little bit of a plate verb on there to give a little bit more bigness and a little bit of after the fact for the snare drum. Once you put it in the mix, what it really does is it just makes the back end, the decay of it, a lot brighter and larger. So yeah, drums track with compression, no compression. In fact, nothing on this. No EQ, no compression. So when you're listening to the dry stuff here, the dry stuff is no EQ, no compression. This is just from the mics to the mic pre's, straight into Pro Tools. That's it, yeah. Not that I don't track with compression, but especially in this case, I really didn't need it for the sound I was trying to capture. And also, it's one of those things where the way I was playing, it would have made it it would have taken a lot more time to play for a while since I don't have an engineer. Oh, that guy, he's all right. Every other Tuesday, that drummer's pretty decent. Thankfully, we recorded these on a Tuesday. Anyway, it would have taken a lot more time since I don't usually have an engineer here with me. I'm engineering my own stuff. To play for a while, come back in here, dial in the compressor for a bit, go back out there, play for a while, and listen to it, and it just would have taken a lot longer. I had a bunch of tunes I had to do in one fell swoop that particular day. So not tracking with any compression really made things a lot simpler. Plus, I can add it on the back end, which you'll see in a bit. So anyway, that's where we're at with that. And if you haven't seen any of the other videos yet, I'll let you know my usual chain. My usual chain is some kind of harmonic work. In this case, I'm using the only thing I'm using besides the channel strip or the Omni Channel strip is I'm using the UAD Studer plugin because it's the closest thing I've found to a real Studer. If I wanted a real Studer, there's 2 or 3 of those in town. I could send my stuff over, and if we had the budget, maybe I would. But this thing sounds so dang close. Plus, it allows me to go through 4 different tape formulations, kind of play with the tape speed, all these things on the fly. Occasionally, what I tell you I will do, and this has nothing to do with the masterclass we're doing, sometimes what I will do, if I do want to go to real tape, is I'll pull up what I want in terms of tape formulation and tape speed and input, and I'll translate those settings to whoever's running these to an actual tape machine for me. So I'll tell them, hey, I'm using, usually if I'm doing that, it's either 456 or 900 for the machines that I usually would send this to. 456 is still pretty popular. At least that type of formulation is still pretty popular with the people that I would send this to. Say, all right, here's what I've got set up for my IPS, and here's where my input is. Can you match it pretty close? I may even use my phone and kind of show them some meters and some settings. But I would say now, 9 times out of 10, I'm using plug-in. So I do a little bit of harmonic work on the front end, and then in this case, like we've covered in the kick drum section of the master classes, I've got some other kind of harmonic thing happening with a little bit of preamp distortion or saturation. And then if you haven't seen this plugin before, you've got these great filter sections that are just built in. I can high pass, low pass with a few different slopes. And then obviously the thump circuit gives you a little bit more low end, but it's not just an EQ. It's something completely outside of that. So in the past, I would probably put in, if I didn't bake it in the pre's I was using, I would put this into Waves NLS or Slate's preamp plug-in. I'd find some kind of console plug-in to throw it into, get a little bit of that saturation. This plug-in has it, and you've got odd and even order harmonics. And if you really want to get crazy with the distortion, you can get into heavy. This middle circuit here, the great thing about this plugin is all of these modules will move around. And so the next thing in my usual setup is I have some kind of EQ that is very surgical. Like in this case, in the kick drum, I was just notching out about 340. Let me actually, since we're talking about overheads and stuff, let me go over to the actual settings for my overhead. So this is the way I've got these overheads set up. And you'll notice that I'm high passing about 66, not too low. I want to keep in some of that 80 to 100, just because it's a good room, so it sounds good in that room. And then I'm using a Q10 right here to notch out. In this case, I was doing 340 before, I think, in the actual kick drum. I'm actually notching out here at 400 in the overheads. And a lot of that, let's play that for a second so you can actually hear why that is that I'm doing that. So let me use my buttons down here. All right. So in terms of the surgical stuff, I'm taking out a resonant frequency that snare drum is creating in the room. Instead of trying to gaff tape that frequency out, I'm doing it with the EQ. I find it's a much more natural way of doing it. That way I don't kill all the other good things that I like about the sound of those open drums. And it's one of those where most of the time when I show someone a move like this, they're like, well, how did you know to do that? Well, basically we narrow up a cue on a parametric band and we just start sweeping until we find the sound that we don't like. The sound that seems to jump out the most. Now, the thing about this is you're going to find resonance at all these frequencies. It's what's the resonance of that snare drum in that room. And I usually can tell it because there's a little more tail on the decay of that ring if you find the actual resonant frequency that's going off in the room. So, here. That. Oh yeah, it's great for bad sounding rooms. With a bad sounding room, I might have 4 of these notches happening. It really depends on the sound of the room. We really worked hard on my room to get it sounding good. So the room itself isn't ever going to give me a problem. It's always going to be if I've got really open drums, there's going to be a frequency or two on those open drums that just get excited in the room. And I'm able just to pull that with EQ and keep all the other very natural sound of what's happening. All right. So that's going on in these overheads. Actually, let's lock that off so that'll stay up on the screen there. You're getting a little bit of preamp saturation, not a ton. One thing I did do, and I just used at the channel level. So one of the things that I do, you'll see here, is I don't record my stereo pairs as a pair. I record them as 2 mono tracks. So it's a lot easier for me to do things like what I'm doing here, which is, for whatever reason, there's steps in my preamps. And so there was about a little more than 1 dB of extra volume coming out of one side in this case. And, in between the steps, I couldn't actually get it in between the steps to level match it absolutely correctly. And so I just kind of pulled this down a little bit. And a lot of that is trying to work on center image. It's not hearing a volume difference, say in a crash cymbal here and a crash cymbal over here. It's the centering of the kick and the snare in the overheads is a lot of what that is. And so, put the limiter on that for a second. I don't think I'm hitting it, but I'm killing it here. Anyway, Yeah, so that's, turn this down just a little bit. I'm mainly thinking about clipping on my stream. If I'm sending too much out to the stream because there's no limiting on the stream, then we might be getting crunchy on the stream. Anyway, so there's a lot of things. Sometimes I may find, when I do it this way, I may find there's a little EQ touch-up I need to do in one side or the other. Maybe one of the overheads is pointing towards something that has a little resonance that I don't particularly like. If I keep it in two separate tracks, then instead of trying to do some kind of crazy thing with a dual mono plug-in or something like that, and it's easier just to do it here. And so the only thing I did high pass this at 70, just so I didn't put too much of that low end, sub low end stuff onto the tape plug-in. I just didn't want that to maybe give me extra stuff going to the tape that would mess up what I wanted on the back side of the tape. And then the 66 on the plug-in is just to manage if there's anything coming off the tape that maybe I'm either not hearing in my sub, or maybe there's something still floating down there that may affect the compression later on. So that's what I'm doing there. All right, so surgical EQ is usually the next thing that's in my chain. And then I'll either do EQ and compression or compression and EQ. In this case, I'm doing a more musical EQ. In this case, for this particular drum sound, I didn't really crank any high end on it. We're going for a little woodier, older sound, so I didn't want it super high fidelity. And then I'm cranking out a little bit, 4.5 dB at 700. So to let you hear what I was hearing in that overhead, it's just this crunchy part of the mid-range that sounds sort of boxy. It gets crunchier the more that you hit the compressor with this thing. All right, so about 4.5 was what I had it set at, and I'm using the parametric setting, kind of not a super tight Q, but not a super wide one either. All right, in the tone section, I'm pulling out even more of that tone, a little bit lower down. I'm pulling out some of that tone, but I'm also carving out some of the overhead sound that, to me, as I was putting the mix together, wasn't usable. It was just kind of a thickness in there that was taking up room for what might be going on the rest of the mix. I can't play you this track. I'm going to play another tune in a second. I can play you the track. But in this track, in this tune, I was listening to, well, you know what? I'm going to pull a little track up, because this tune's going to be out in another week or two, I think. So I might actually be able to play a little of this. I'll keep it low. Especially because there was a fair amount of low mid content. That's as much as the track as I'm going to play, so I don't get in trouble. But, it should be out in the next couple of weeks, I think. They're done mixing the record. I do know that. So, anyway, so I was just clearing out a little of this low-mid stuff. And again, this was, I don't know the mix of the drums will sound like this in the album. This was the mix I'm letting you hear right now is the mix I sent to the producer when they okayed the tracks. That way that he could have an idea of what I thought the drums should sound like. And if they wanted to mix them accordingly, great. If not, the great thing about the raw tracks, the way they're recorded, is there's a ton of sonic options. There's a ton of information in those tracks. So you can mix it a whole lot of different ways. Now, as far as EQ, on the low end, I'm down around 100, and I want a little more warmth. So I went a fair amount on this alternate kind of shelf. I went about 4.5 up, which, I don't know, if you're listening on an iPhone speaker, you won't hear this. Just kind of a nice warm resonance down there. And this particular kind of shelf does a little bit of a dip, so it's dipping around 200-ish to get any trash out of there before it goes back up onto the shelf. So I've got the de-esser on, but I don't think it's really hitting anything. Nah, it doesn't look like it. I turn the de-esser off. We talked in the other videos about how I use a de-esser to get rid of certain tones that just build up past a certain point. And then as far as compression on these overheads, because it was such a constrained, small stroke length to play this, I mean, I didn't like slam on the drums. I didn't really need a lot of compression. I was mainly using the compression to rein in anything that was super loud, just to make, like, every once in a while the light will go off when you hear a tom fill or certain snare drums or snare drum later in the tune, like some snare drum and cymbal accents. It just kind of pulls those things down a little bit. And in this case, I was just trying to make it more consistent. The idea with this drum sound was it needs to sound as consistent as a loop, but it needs to have the life and the detail of a real drummer. So consistency of loop-based stuff, but all the nuance and all the depth of a real drummer. Send tracks printed with your plug-in processing as well as raw. It really depends on what somebody wants. If they want to hear what I think the mix should sound like, sometimes I'll send them a 2 mix of a mix like this. Usually they just hear it in my rough mix I send back for their evaluation. It gives them an idea what the drums should do in the track. And usually that's the case. Sometimes I'll have people that want me to send them both versions. But the thing about the way that I do my processing is it's so mix dependent, especially when it comes to the compression and the parallel compression. It really is very mix dependent with all that stuff. So I don't know how helpful it is with someone. Occasionally, so if someone's paying me extra to actually mix the drums, I'll either send them the session just like it is, let them know what plugins I'm using. They can just import that into their session. Or what I do a lot of times, there's a couple of video production companies that I'll do drums for where they work on quick turnarounds. So I'll pre-mix all the drums to their temp mix. Usually I get a temp mix of what they're keeping. I'm towards the tail end of their process. They'll send me temp mixes of the music that they're keeping, and I mix my drums into it, and I just send them a 2 mix. I don't even send for those situations where they've got lots of videos that they're cranking through and they got quick turnaround. I'm just sending them a 2 mix of what I think the drums ought to sound like. 9 times out of 10, they run with it. Some other times they'll phone back or text back and go, hey, can you do this, that, or the other? Do a quick tweak. It takes 60 seconds, not counting opening and closing the program. 60 seconds to make the tweak, send off a new 2 mix, and we're done. So most of the time, if these are for remote session tracks, they're just hearing my mix in the eval, the MP3 I send them after I cut the track. I'm going to open up another session in a second I did mix that'll be out in a couple of weeks. And in that case, the mix you're going to hear is the mix that's going to be on the record. So that's it in terms of the overheads. Super, super simple. A lot of it is just managing the gain through the chain, making sure that I'm not coming off that tape plug-in too hot, and making sure I don't have anything that's, especially in the subloads, that's setting off some of this processing and causing a real weird buildup that maybe obscures the sound. And then, in this case, it's just very musical, surgical combination of moves that just rein this stuff in. And so I'll take it out of solo and we'll hear it in context. So I said we talk about room mics too. In the case of these room mics, they weren't real far. I mean, they weren't like 40 feet in front of the drums. But I definitely was shaving off some from 60 on down before I hit the tape. Like if I just bypass this, you may hear a little, I definitely feel it on the low end. all of a sudden there's definitely a build up there that for this track. Now, if it were like a hip hop track or something where they wanted a lot of low sub, I probably would have kept that stuff in going to the tape. But in this case, it's supposed to sound like a real classic kind of drum sound. If you listen back to the 60s and 70s drums, the room's about 17 or 18 wide, maybe 19 or 20 deep. So it's not a super large room. But also, the mics were only probably, I'm looking in there, the mics might have been at most 7 feet away from the drums. So it was a tight room setup. It wasn't like I was even 20 feet away. And they were pointed almost like you're standing. The way I did these room mics, really it was more like a pair of ears standing about 7 feet in front of the drums. So it was really just to get a little more depth to the sound. We weren't going for a huge rock sound with this where I needed, some kind of big thing where I'd back these things up or put them in a different room, or in some cases, turn the mics around and have them face the wall so that you're not getting any direct sound. We didn't do anything like that. This was just trying to get a little bit more depth. It wasn't so much for bigness as it was depth. I hit the tape doing the same thing we did before, and then getting into the plug-in. A little bit more saturation just because it sounded good. Only went about 2 dB on the thump. And then if you look at the EQ processing, in this case, I waited to the end to do that little move. Here I did a lot more. We'll carve that up a little, and I'll show that to you. Let's keep that on. Now let's listen for a second. That's with the end of the chain. If I can move this thing over. Come on. Doesn't always. This is if I put it at the beginning of the chain. Not a whole lot of difference, really, because I'm not really hitting it hard with the compressor. The compressor's just managing super loud stuff. EQ-wise, in this case, I did all of my musical stuff first. Took out a little in that little lower mid-range. That's just trash. There's nothing in there usable at all. Then I also took out around almost 3.5K for the cymbals. I wanted to make sure that I didn't get this real harsh stuff. Let's get a crash in here. That harsh sound, I wanted the crashes to be a little smoother. Almost as if they had been recorded with a couple of ribbon mics or something. Not quite as hi-fi. That's why I didn't roll in any high end or any of that stuff. And then on the low end, about almost 1.5 dB at 90. Just to give it a little more bottom, a little warmer on the bottom. Again, compressor set kind of high, almost 6 to 1, with 8 on the attack on this compressor. If you're in the FET, is not nearly as fast as 8 might be on some other compressor. This one's a little, it's a little more forgiving on that part. Didn't use a gator expander, but one of the big moves here is that move in the mid-range. So what am I doing? Around 420, a little higher. As you get further away, I don't know if it's the Doppler effect or what, but as you get further away, the pitch on that resonance changes. And then now you hear it, don't you? You hear it coming off the snare drum, just during the snare drum. A lot of it's the snare drum setting that room off. So if I solo or I just take out those individual bands, it's pretty easy once you've heard them notched out. And with some of these, I use fairly wide cues too. That's kind of wide, 30 and 46. They're not super tight. So you get this whole little piece of the mid-range that's cut out, but specifically really notching those frequency bands so that they're not there, you know. It's really important when you're playing that and you're hearing those resonances that aren't in key with the song. All of a sudden you're hearing notes that are playing when you're playing wide open drums like that. You're hearing notes play against chords, and sometimes it makes the chord kind of, you turn your head because there's a dissonance there. So you just notch them out, and all of a sudden it's not there. So I'll put the track back in for a second. I don't want to play too much of that track. I don't want to get in trouble. So anyway, so that's that particular drum sound. Super tight snare drum. It's tuned up and a little bit ringy. With I forgot to show you while we're talking about overheads and all that kind of stuff. If I can turn this down. Oh, I can't turn this down. I got 8 things that I can turn down. We'll turn this down a little bit so we can talk about it. Yeah, I don't have automation on that. All right, so the kit, if you haven't seen the other videos, the kit we're using, that was the kick drum setup with the D112 and the sub, the Low Freak by Solomon. Well, I'll get to that in a second. So the drum kit for this track was this 26-inch bass drum with the wood hoops, and then the toms are 13 and 16-inch toms with the wood hoops, and the snare drum was this 3.75 by 14 Carl Palmer snare, 4x14 Carl Palmer snare drum. Great sound, a real meaty brass snare drum, and it's the die-cast hoops are what make it sound so meaty, you know. Anyway, so older cymbals, that kind of thing. Now, as far as the overhead setup, I'm using these. Oh, not that one. I'm using this new microphone that I designed for myself, and that are available now if you go over to sessionation.com/mic. Just a great set of large diaphragm condenser mics. I think it's a 34 millimeter capsule, and just great warm electronics. It's a FET, but it sounds a lot like a tube mic. Just a really, really warm sound. So on all the stuff I'm playing for you today, these are the overheads that we're using. And even though the drums are a little bit different, this is I actually took these pictures this morning. This was the exact placement of the overheads on that other kit. So I think that's about 60 inches above the snare drum, maybe. Somewhere between 56 and 60 inches above the snare drum. You can kind of see how far away from the ceiling we are there. And so that's the kit for the next track I'm going to play for you. But the overheads didn't move, and the position of the kit didn't move at all. So that's why I just took a picture of these. Here's another picture that sort of shows you the relationship of the mics over the drums. Kind of gives you an idea of how far away the mics are, and then how far away they are from the ceiling. That's just where they sounded good. Here's another picture of that. If you're looking from above, you can kind of see the placement. We're sort of over the middle of the drum set, not the middle, the snare drum being the middle, but you know, if where I'm sitting is one edge and the front of the kick drum's the other edge, not that middle. From the actual footprint of the drums, about midways over the drums. So I'm getting a pretty good picture of the drums as a whole with this kind of setup. The close mics just give me more presence and more punch when I actually go to mix those in. And then let's see. Here's from the other side, kind of at an angle, so it's a little deceptive. But it's just to the left. The center of the image is just to the left of the bass drum pedal in the way that this is set up. And then is that the last? That's the last picture, I guess. Okay, yeah. So that gives you an idea of how the overheads for both these tracks were set up. And again, if you're interested, you can go over to sessionation.com/mic, and you can pick up a set of those. They're for sale right now, as a matter of fact. Love those overheads. I designed them for myself, and to give me something that I just wasn't getting out of the majority of the. I mean, I've got at the studio here, I've got at least a dozen different pairs of mics I could use, and they all do great stuff. But there was a sound, a good general overall warm yet transparent sound. Like the microphone really, it gives you a very warm version of whatever you're putting it in front of. The mic really makes you work to get a great drum sound, because if the drums don't sound great in the room, they may not sound great with these mics. Some microphones I have here, they can actually improve the sound of the drums in the room by how the microphone is basically EQ'd, how they build the microphone, the components of the microphone will actually make up for maybe some deficiencies or some problems in a drum sound. These won't necessarily do that. They're going to give you back what you get, what you've got sitting on the floor and how they're played. But man, it gives you all of the sound. That was the thing that I really like about these. They're reminiscent of a U87 in that fact that, the great thing about a U87 is that when you throw up a pair of U87s, it gives you all the sound to work with. You've got plenty of sound to work with when it comes to mix. You're not doing any big sweeping carving out of things like a lot of overheads, especially cheaper overheads will do. It's not hyped on the high end like a lot of cheaper overheads. If I want more high end, I can roll it in with EQ afterwards, and it never gets harsh. It never gets brittle. So that was the reason I use those. Dang, I really do need to go get a tan. Gee whiz. I got a studio tan. Anyway, all right, so that right there is the first tune I wanted to show you, and how I use the plug-in on overheads. Let me open up this other mix for you real quick. So I do want you to hear the drums in the context of a full mix. And then that way you can hear how this really does make a huge difference. So this next mix I'm going to pull up is something I can play for you because I'm producing it, and it'll be out online in the next 2 weeks. So if we do a little bit of something ahead of time, it's going to be okay if we do that. I'm just opening the session up now. It's got a ton of tracks. There's probably, I don't know, with vocals and stuff in here, there's probably 80 tracks in this thing. So it's taking a second to open up. But so the track you're about to hear is by a really good buddy of mine, a guy named Mark Cavalli. If you're a fan or have been a fan of the band Ocean Street, the band I was in 15 years ago, that's where Mark and I met. And he's still, along with his other gigs, still doing some stuff with his band Ocean Street. But he's got these great tunes that he's written that just aren't right for that band. They're definitely very specific to him and who he is as an artist. And so he started bringing me tunes last year, and this is the newest one we've worked on. It's probably gonna be the first one we put out, actually. And let me flip over to get my iPad working so I can do this without the mouse. Let's take a look at this. So we're going to listen to the track. This is a sneak peek of the entire track, not mastered, but mixed. And I want you to hear the drums in the context of this this entire mix. In fact, let me put on. You know what? Let me move this over here. If I don't do something, you're not going to get to hear it. 11, 12. Okay. So let's put this in 11 and 12, Brian. Oh, first thing before I screw anything up. Resave this as something else because I've got to do one touch up on this mix before we send it off. Anyway, let's see. I want to send that output to you so that you hear it. I want you to be able to hear 11 and 12. Ah, yes, there we go. I'm going to back it off just a little bit. Okay. All right, so let's listen to this a second.
Just keeps getting better every day. Whenever we're together every day. Oh, every day. We'll have a funky good time. I'll be yours, girl. You'll be mine. We'll have a funky good time. When we're together, we'll leave all the troubles behind. Days are filled with love and sunshine. We'll leave all the troubles behind. Oh, we're together, it's every day. It just keeps getting better every day. Whenever we're together every day. Oh, every day. Oh, every day. You're the one I run to every day. The one my heart belongs to every day. Oh, every day. Let me hear the horns, yeah. Every day just keeps getting better every day.
Let's listen to those drums. Only reverb on that, I think, is, yeah, a little bit of plate reverb. Put the drum verb in there. The always fabulous Sam's on the bass. Yeah, Sam on the bass. Atlanta's answer to Jamerson. If you're a Motown fan at all, you know that reference. I could listen to that dude play bass all day long, y'all. Seriously, I could listen to him play bass all day long. All right, so let's take a look at these overheads. The path I'm going through here exactly the same, straight from the mics through the mic pre's, which in this case was secret tube mic pre that at this point is considered vintage because they made it in the late 80s. That's considered vintage now, or classic. We'll say classic because music from that time now. If it plays on a classic rock station, I guess this mic pre would be a classic mic pre. Anyway, that's my secret weapon mic pre, tube mic pre. But that's only part of the sound. And in fact, let's do this. Let's just bypass these. Turn this up, you can hear it. A little bit of a right shift, but in the mix I did that for a reason. You'll have to hear the mix to know, but the thing you'll notice if you look at these overheads, so I'm fully 100% left and right going into my stereo bus. But coming out of my stereo bus, I'm only 50%. The reason is this. On most of the classic, we were going for a Memphis sound on this, a real Memphis-y feel and sound, but newer. And so if you listen to those records, they're not fully wide stereo images. It's not like you hear one crash cymbal all the way on this side. I got to stay on this side of the green screen. One cymbal all the way on this side and another cymbal all the way on this side. Where am I? Yeah. Oh, I'm looking at my cell phone on the screen over there. You didn't have discrete left and right. If you had a stereo image, most of the time they were mono, but if you had a stereo image, it was very tight. So in this case, I pulled it in and only went about 50% of the distance between center and all the way left and right. But I processed the plugins completely as stereo. That's what the channel strip in. So just getting a little tape compression, a little bit of good tape goodness out of that plug-in. Channel strip's doing all the work. And then I top it off with a little bit of the UAD's pull tech. It's got a little 100 bump, and then I'm pushing up a little around 3, believe it or not. Oh, no, I'm going 3 up around 12. I'm sorry. 3 up around 12, just to give it a little air. Didn't really want high end. I just wanted a little, if you go up too much, it's too splashy. I just wanted to open the top end up a little. We'll turn that off for now. You'll hear subtle, real subtle, not super. All right, so let's look at the channel strip. What's the channel strip doing? Fair amount of saturation on the even order harmonics. We're high passing here at what? 60, same thing. Don't go too low because we want a little of that warmth. And then a little bit of the thump built into it. None of that surgical EQ. Didn't have to do it for this. But I am putting in 4 at 9. So 4 dB at 9K. Now without it, and this is the difference with musical EQ versus surgical EQ. That's 4 dB at 9K. But the way this high shelf is on this EQ, it never gets harsh. It just opens up the top a little. Doesn't get super bright. Now the other thing I'm doing I am taking a little of that 700 out, just to give it a smoother sound. Medium sort of Q, nothing too tight, nothing too loose. And a little of this. A little of that resonance in the room. And then I'm putting back a little more around 130. If you've got a phone on, you're not hearing this. But if you're listening from some good speakers, just warms up the bottom a little. But listen to that. That's most of the kit. The cymbals are louder than everything else for the most part, but you've got a fair amount of kick drum and a fair amount of snare drum in that sound. So the way that I'm hitting the drums and the position of the mics over the drums, it's not just a cymbal mic. It really is a full kit perspective. with that mic set up. So with compression, I have to go back to here. I guess I could loop it. With the compression on this thing, I'm getting as much as 3 dB of compression. I'm using the FET. It's a little quicker. It's got a little bit more grit to it, a little more excitement. Only doing almost 3 to 1. Open up the attack a little bit so the attack kind of gets you through there a little. See how much of that gain reduction I'm getting, and my release is fairly quick too. 225. Now I'm judiciously using this this mix knob here at the bottom. That's the fully compressed sound right there. It dulls off the snare drum a little bit. It takes a little of the attack and the snap out of things. Not the initial part of it, but there's, like, if you listen to different parts of the sound, the initial transient, slightly after the transient, into the middle of the sound, and then the tail of the sound. You know, you can work with a compressor to hit all different points there. When I roll back this thing to about 65, 66% and do my parallel compression, I win back a little bit of the snap on the that attack. It's a little brighter. It's not quite as dulled off. Now, if I open up the attack, I'm not catching those notes as well. I want something that sounds really natural and balanced. I want it to sound like I didn't do anything. It's definitely more of a cymbal mic until I hit it with this channel strip. I hear the cymbals really well. Especially that ride cymbal. Of course, the ride cymbal's closer to center. Not using the gate, not using surgical EQ. And then occasionally I'm getting some red clip lights on here, but you know what? I don't care. The great thing about this is this plug-in, red clip lights are not a bad thing. Red clip lights are actually a little bit of sonic goodness there. So, plus, most of those clips are really short transient stuff. So if there is a little bit of harmonic distortion happening, it's just on the front edge of the note. So it sort of rounds it off a little bit. And then all I'm doing with that, other than just what the actual plug-in does with nothing engaged, just makes it prettier. That's the pretty plug-in. Everything's prettier when you run it through a Pultec. I don't know why they didn't ever use that for their slogan. Everything's prettier when you push it through a Pultec. And other than the obvious slight difference there is in the Universal Audio Pultec versus the Puig Tech that Waves makes, the main reason I use the UAD one, not so much for the difference in the sound, because for what I'm doing, they both do almost the exact same thing. It was more for just to make sure I had enough processing power on the back end, because I didn't print the auto tune on the horns. I did tune the horns up a little bit. And there's some additional processing on background vocals to make them even bigger. And the plugin that I used for that can be a bit of a resource hog, especially when you're using 8 instances of it like I did. So that's the overhead for this this track. Let's pull up the room sound a second. Notice it sounds a little slapbacky, doesn't it? Totally the vibe. It's supposed to be a classic track. So to have a little bit of that slapback sound in the room mics. All right. So what am I doing here? I'm notching out that problem frequency. I'll pull it up in one side for you. That problem frequency in the open drums, I'm getting rid of it before it hits the tape plug-in. Yeah, exact same on both sides. All right, here's the rooms without any of that. Immediately you can hear what that notch does. Now, I run all day long with that as a room sound. Different placement on the room mics this time from the last track we did. This, I wanted a little bigger. I want it to have almost like there's a pre-delay built into it, where you hear the sound of the room separate from the sound of the drums. The room sound before, we call that an integrated sound. That's where the sound of the drums and the sound of the room are sort of melted together like a grilled cheese. There's a little bit of a separation between the direct sound of the drums and the sound of the room, like a pre-delay on a reverb, except there's not a reverb here. This is the placement of the microphones in the room. So I sort of build in a pre-delay into the sound of it. I did not bring something to drink. Cough without my mic on. All right. Now, put the Studer in. You can hear what the Studer does for the low end automatically. But I'm hitting that pretty hard for the room mics. I want a fair amount of tape compression. I'm wanting a lot of that low mid goodness that the tape will bring to this sound. All right, let's see what the Scheps is doing. Without it, it's a good room sound, but I'm going for something big now, something big and woolly. You can hear I'm really making that hit. Compressor's working, using an opto compressor, so I'm already getting a pretty fat sound. Fair amount of saturation on even order harmonics. Rolling off a little lower at 57. I only did, believe it or not, only 2 dB on the thump. All right, highs up there, 10.5 K. Almost 4.5 dB. And again, with this particular EQ, it's not hyping it. It's just opening the top end up a little so it doesn't sound muffled. In this case, somewhere around 1K, I was hearing splashy. The one thing about that pre-delay is it can get a little splashy after the initial thing. Once you get into the mix, it can get to be a mess. Especially if you got other things that take up that space. We've got some tambourines and some shakers and some other things. I'm trying to get this mic to fall in here. Some other things in this mix that are gonna some of the attack's gonna live in that area. So I cleared it out a little bit. Tone wise, yep, down around that 300, 250 to 300, maybe 325. I almost always cut something, even if it's a great sounding room, because there's some unusable something in there. There's nothing usable in there in terms of the drum sound, just nothing. There's plenty of other things in the track that can live in that area, and if I clear it out of the room sound, it doesn't make the rooms any smaller. It, if anything, it just leaves space for something else. And then down around 70, obviously I pumped it up about 3 dB. But I used that really musical shelf that dips a little bit, so it probably dipped around 80 something, 80 something, 85, maybe up into 90. Dipped a little before it goes back up. All right. Opto compressor's doing a fair amount of work here. I'm getting, if I look at gain reduction on this thing, on the drum fills, I'm getting as much as 5 dB of compression, which is a fair amount. Really, I'm shaving off a lot of that so that I'm bringing the inside of the sound out. That's part of what makes it sound bigger. I've got all the close mics to give me the punch and the definition. I need to fill it in between those attacks. And that's really what this room mic's doing. We're doing 83, 84% there on the parallel. So it's mostly the compressed sound. Woo, right there towards the end, 9 dB of compression on that drum fill. We're 2.8, almost 3 to 1, 13 milliseconds on the attack. Pretty quick release. But again, it's an opto compressor, so it's slow. So its fast is slow compared to, say, a VCA or definitely a FET. Sorry about this mic thing. The way I put it on, it's tugging back here on the back of the seat. Now, the one thing I am doing, we didn't stop to talk about, to keep the cymbals from sounding harsh with all that compression, somewhere around 2.8, almost 3K, I centered in one of those de-essers to make sure that never got really harsh. And then down here in that woolly area, I EQ'd some out, but every once in a while on certain hits, and definitely during the drum fills, it builds up even more. So I'm just using the de-esser to take that out. So in this case, it's almost like a dynamic EQ, really is what it is. I'm using the de-esser like a dynamic EQ to make sure that when stuff's really loud, that particular frequency range doesn't build up too much. Put it back in. Where's my... Oh, I got something else turned on. Hang on.
Every day we'll have a funky good time. I'll be yours, girl, you'll be mine, and we'll have a funky good time. When we're together, we'll leave all the troubles behind. Days are filled with love and sunshine. We'll leave all the troubles behind. Oh, we're together. It's every day. It just keeps getting better every day. Whenever we're together every day. Oh, every.
Hey, Andrew. Presets on the Studer. Usually what I do a lot of times is just so I grab a formula quicker, and I use my presets a little differently. I don't really use the preset and just lock it in. A lot of times I'll know, like in this case, I know that the modern rock is 15 IPS on a 456 at +6. So I grab that because I know that that's what that's going to give me without having to do it bang, 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 do it all individually on the calibration and the tape form. I grab the preset knowing, all right, here's what the options are it starts me with, and then I start cranking around on it. Like in this case, or if a preset starts at 30 IPS and I go, you know what, it sounds better at 15, or sometimes something sounds better at 7.5. Like guitars or drum buses, a lot of times will sound better at 7.5. And so that might not be in the preset, but I'll just flip over to it. So in that case, this started out as the modern rock, but I only use that because I know it gives me the 15 IPS of 456 with a +2 on the caliber, or +6 on the calibration. So that's where I started, but that's not, like if I were to redial that up, it would be a little bit different. Sometimes I'll start with that, and then I'll flip through the tape formulations. I'm like, I know what 456 sounds like. I know what GP9 sounds like. What's the difference in those two? So it really is just, in my case, I use the presets on it if I know it gets me, so I can do one mouse click instead of 3 or 4. So yeah. Now I don't ever save them. I don't really have, because it's always, salting to taste. So I'd rather start with a combination and then make it fit whatever I'm doing. So, and then sometimes I'm kind of playing along with other stuff here. But yeah, the presets to me are just, they're suggestions about, I don't even look at modern rock, kick drum. I look more at like the speed of the tape, what formula it's using, what the calibration is. And I don't really care about what they say it's for. For something's for film, I don't care. In fact, I wouldn't be able to tell you if somebody used it on film. So, yeah. So for me, it's just about what kind of tape compression and what kind of tape, the normal things you'd get from running to tape, what am I getting from that particular plugin? The Studer's my go-to, but I'll pull up any of the other ones. I mean, they all have different sounds. It's just, for me, that was the one that really definitely works 80% of the time, probably. All right, so that's the room mics. If I pull up just room mics and overheads, most of the drum sound is right there. If anything, the cymbals are a little hot, but again, I've got close mics. That's, if I wanted the cymbals to be perfectly balanced with the drums, I'd probably back them up a little bit. I mean, I've got another 3 feet on my ceiling where I could back them up and get a more accurate balance. I mean, I couldn't play the cymbals any softer, because on here, believe it or not, I was barely tapping the cymbals. A lot of the sustain from the cymbals is actually coming from the compression. So yeah, in this case, if I introduce the close mics are just giving a little more punch, a little more directness. Bottom snare obviously is brightening that up. And in the case of the toms, I'm really using the toms to make the attack a little more present in the mix. Especially because I think these might have been the wood hoop. Actually, these might have been the wood hoop drums. Trying to remember. So, but I would say 80%, 90% of the drum sound is right there in the room mics and the overheads. The other thing is in the mix, I need to get my auto ducker set up for this thing. I had to be real careful. I like a lot of overheads in the mix, but for a mix like this, that Memphis-y kind of sound, you can't put too much overheads in there. You're hearing the cymbal set off and a little of the decay of the cymbal, but it's not hanging out there like a rock track, And then I'm just using the room mics for the bigness to give it some space, front to back, left to right. We're going to do one more of these where I go through an entire mix. We'll talk about toms, we'll talk about parallel compression, we'll talk about a bunch of other, how I use a couple of different reverbs. Turn this back up so you can hear some more. I'm having fun listening to it. I've heard this song no less than 3,000 times, I think, in the last 6 months. I absolutely love it. Matthew Kaminsky on the organ, ladies and gentlemen. Rick Hinkle on the guitar. All right, so that's every day. That's the new Mark Cavalli track that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks, and I'm glad I got to play that one for you. I'm really, really happy with that track. And there's a lot of tracks in there between the drums and a mixture of different percussion, very specifically placed percussion tracks. Work on taping this mic down, I think. Bass guitar with the DI and the amp tracks. There's an E-piano in there that Mark played. Matthew Kaminsky on the organ. That's a real Hammond B3 organ in there. Rick Hinkle playing some really, really tasty guitar. Horn section from Nashville with guys I never met before. These are guys that play horns on one of Cavalli's gigs. His Piano Man, Billy Joel tribute band. So that's his horn section for those gigs. They one of the guys wrote the horn arrangement, sent it to me, and then, as I always do, I tend to subtract and in some cases move things around. So I subtracted some stuff from the horn parts that they sent me, and then we'll talk about the mix later. And then, believe it or not, no doubled vocals. That's a single lead vocal track, just processed a very specific way. And then we went and recut a few lines after we got everybody else in. It's where there's a lot of tracking. There's a couple of ad-libs there. A lot of vocal tracks, a lot of vocal stacking on there. So anyway, we'll talk about all that stuff later. That's another subject for another day. I really, really hope that you've enjoyed this masterclass. If you're into mixing, I hope you got a ton out of it. I go back to the first thing I said in the very first video. All of this is predicated on a few things. It's predicated on a great sounding drum set. And great not just meaning expensive, and great not just meaning well-tuned. Great also meaning it needs to be the right drum kit sound for the track. If I hadn't used such a classic sounding drum kit and cymbal choice there, if I'd brought in like a Pearl reference kit with some, some Sabian AA cymbals, not that there's anything wrong with Pearl or Sabian, but it wouldn't have been the right sound for that track. I needed something that was a little thuddier, a little woodier, a little more classic. With the cymbal sounds that I chose from this, those are much older cymbals, or in the case of two of those cymbals, two of them I pre-aged myself with a little process that I've done on about a dozen of my cymbals to make them age about 40 years in 6 months. And so taking some cymbals that were 40 and 50 years old with some newer ones that I pre-aged and getting a really classic drum sound. So I'd say 80% of the drum sound is right there on the floor. Then, and that comes from the right drums played the right way. I'm not slamming over my head, playing big fat rock beats. Hitting the drum in a way to get the right timbre out of the drums, the right balance and timbre out of the cymbals against the drums. All this stuff we're talking about is predicated on this kind of stuff. So technically, there ain't nothing in that drum part that any drummer that's been playing for 6 months couldn't play. But there are a lot of other nuances to it. It's about picking the right drums, tuning them the right way, picking the right cymbals, hitting them the right way, hitting the drums the right way, getting the right inner kit balance, and then a lope. Getting the right lope, the right feel for the entirety of the track. I didn't. That's not me getting a good verse for 2 bars and just copying and pasting the thing on through there. That's me getting a good take and then going with a good take. And that way it's got some life to it. It's got some character to it. But then it's the right mics, put through the right pre's, recorded at levels that work well, and gain staging through the plugins so that they do their work the best way possible. That's a gain staging through plugins is a lesson that we'll have to talk about some other time, because there's so much that I see wrong about the way people do that are a detriment to the overall sound. And in this case, I'm watching my gain staging all the way through all the plugins. So all of my boosts and cuts and all that stuff keeps keeps nothing goes crazy up or down. My gain really stays pretty even all the way through for the most part. Nothing gets out of whack. That's about all I got for you on this. I hope it was informative. Like I say, hope it was informative. If you got any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below or to the side, whatever platform you're watching on right this second. Put those comments there. I'll answer them and type them in. I may, if I have time, I'll go back and, even though I answered all the questions so far, talking about them, I'll try and answer them in the comments as well. Although I like for people to have to watch this to get their answers. That's why we didn't make a 10-minute video. I mean, I could have made 10-minute videos, I guess. The other thing, the giveaway. I have to mention the giveaway one more time. If you love this plugin and you're like, I got to have it right now, you can go to faderjocks.com/waves and pick it up. There's a promo code now. I think it's like Creative 20 or Creative 40 or something. You'll find it on the page when you go there, that you actually get another % off whatever the sale price is. But yeah, faderjocks.com/waves. You can go get that. If you want to sign up for the giveaway, you can go to faderjocks.com, sign up for the email list. And next week, I'm recording a brand new episode of the audio podcast. And we're going to be giving away another copy of this plugin during the podcast, and when I'm recording the audio podcast this week. So if you haven't listened to any of the back episodes, there's a few of them. But starting next week, we're going to try and do them every week. And you'll find those at faderjocks.com. Sign up for the email list. Get in the queue to possibly win your own copy of this. Or if you got to have it like right away, just go over faderjocks.com/waves, pick it up. I use it on every single mix. It has replaced a chain that would be anywhere from 4 to 7 plugins. And it sped up my workflow incredibly. You know, what would have taken a couple of hours to do now is more like 30 minutes. And not to say I get a whole mix done, but like a drum mix. If a drum mix would have taken me 2 hours to pull together with all of this detail before, now it's 30 minutes. And so it speeds up my workflow. It's a lot better on your computer in terms of CPU usage. And it just sounds really good. Ultimately, all this is about what the sound is. If it don't sound good, there ain't no point in doing it, right? So that's all I got for you. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed a video like this, because that's one of the impetuses for me to do this. I mean, part of it is I'm sharing stuff with you that I do that I don't think everybody knows about. None of the stuff is like, trade secret or anything. It's just good, solid engineering stuff. But it's stuff that I couldn't necessarily find easily when I was coming up. But the other thing is, it's a chance for me, when we do the live stuff, for me to interact with you. If you're watching this on the recorded version, it's a chance for me to interact with you after the fact. If you got a lot of information out of this, but you've got a ton more questions, or you'd like to spend some one-on-one time, I do this kind of thing as a private lesson as well. We could either do it in person, we can do it via Zoom or Skype, and you can just send me a DM or an email. You can email me, brian@brianstevens.com. We can set some of that time up for you. And I'm always welcome to show you what I know about doing this stuff, because the more great stuff that we can all make, the better off we are, right? That's the way I feel about it. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. And I guess I'll see you when I see you.